right, guys. How you doing? All right, so welcome to this week's Did You Know, presented by Next Home Shore Success. As you know, we talked about the New Jersey Real Estate Consumer Protection Act of 2024 when we talked about the buyer's agency agreement and the changes with brokerage cooperation across the board within the state. Some more important updates that law actually did bring about that are very notable mentions is the seller's disclosure agreements, agency disclosure, particularly affecting open houses, and designated agency disclosures. All right, so for the seller's disclosure, there are some key differences between now and prior to August of 2024. As you know, it's always been required to disclose those known defects or issues with your property before when you're selling it. But however, you used to not have to, sign the seller's disclosure statement. You were allowed to opt out of actually having a signed, filled out statement. Now it is required. You actually have to fill it out and sign it and have it presented to a potential buyer before you go under contract with them, meaning before you accept their offer and you both are contractually obligated to that, contract. Another notable difference is the expanded flood risk disclosure, which essentially mandates sellers and landlords must provide a written notice of a property's location in the FEMA flood hazard areas, special or moderate or high risk to low risk. You have to make sure you disclose that information on that seller's disclosure statement, and it has to be in a written notice for the buyers. You also have to, go ahead and disclose any past flood damage or risks to the property. This also does apply to all residential sales within the state, including estate sales and even bank-owned properties, whereas before they were allowed to opt out and not do it. They are actually required to fill this out now as well. So what does this mean for homeowners or investors looking to sell their properties? Well, essentially it's shifting the selling obligation from buyer beware to seller beware. It's enhancing the liability against seller. Essentially, they're imposing higher accountability for failing to disclose those material defects and issues or even flood risks. The consequences for, failing to disclose now is legal liability, possible contract rescission, which is essentially the cancellation of the contract, and you could possibly be even found guilty of fraud if it is found that you didn't know about it, you lied on that disclosure statement or didn't fill it out. All right, Christine, take it away with the next update.
So our next update is on agency disclosure. Quick clarification on agency disclosure. This is nothing new. The Consumer Information Statement, which explains the different types of agency representation and who an agent actually represents, has been around for a long time before 2024. What has changed, though, is the agency disclosure requirement. So now listing agents and agents who are hosting open houses are required to clearly state and display signage, letting buyers know that they represent the seller, not the buyer. Now, speaking of agency disclosure, we're going to cover another key point from New Jersey's Real Estate Consumer Protection Enhancement Act, which is designated agency. So designated agency, it affects the practice of dual agency. In New Jersey, dual agency, which means one agent representing the buyer and the seller, that has always been required to be disclosed. And both parties will sign an informed consent to dual agency. But what's new is that agencies are required to provide buyers and sellers with an informed consent to designated agency when the same brokerage represents both sides, but with two different agents. And this ensures that everyone acknowledges how representation is structured.
All right, guys, that essentially wraps up those, key updates the New Jersey Real Estate Consumer Protection Enhancement Act brought on. Now, important things to know about this is that all these changes with this act was set in effort to ensure greater transparency for the consumer, both your sellers and buyers.
So next week, we're going to point out some other New Jersey law updates that came into effect in 2024 that will also have an impact on New Jersey real estate. And these have to do with the mansion tax and the lead-based paint certifications. So that's it for this week. We have a few different sources on the screen if you want to go ahead and research more about anything that we went over today.
All right, guys. And remember, if you have questions or are, planning to buy or sell real estate here in the state of New Jersey, you can always reach out to us and contact us. Here's our contact information, our office number here. And my extension is 102 and Christine's is 103. You can also send us an email. Both of our emails are there provided. Okay.
So thank you for listening. This is Nina and Christine signing off. Please stay tuned for next week's Did You Know? And don't forget to like, share, and follow.
All right. Thanks, guys. Signing out.